Hi everyone, it's Sarah Hay and Bob Clements here with Bob Clements International. We have to call it that because he's old and he forgets his name. So we are here and we are excited to talk about should you open up a new location. Now before we get started, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to go ahead and write in the chat what's the name of the dealership that you're with and where are you from? We want to know that from you. So write the name of your dealership and where are you from? We're so excited to do this webinar today because this is one of those conversations that's probably one of the biggest questions we get from dealers over and over again, regardless of the industry and regardless of where they are in the world. It's like, should we actually open up a new location? So for our webinar today, I need you to grab a pen and a piece of paper. At the end of the webinar, we're going to have you rate yourself on a few things because we love judging people and we know you love to judge yourself.
There's nothing we like more.
Nothing we like more. So we're going to have you grab a pen, a paper, and we are going to walk through some ways that you can answer the question for yourself. Should you really open a new location? Now, I want to go through a few quick pieces of housekeeping before we get started today. Number one, while we never ever in a million years intend that this is going to go offline or go off the rails, well, it may go off the rails, but that's a different conversation. But if we were to actually lose connection, which we have 700 different backups to make sure we don't, if you lose connection, simply go back to your email with the registration link, click the link in the email, and it will bring you right back onto the webinar. So if you lose connection, make sure that happens. Number two, utilize the chat feature. This is something that we get to talk back and forth through the entire webinar, and it is so much fun for us, and we're really just here to have a good time. Finally, I would say I want to just point out that in the midst of this webinar, we have incredible sponsors who are going to be able to provide this webinar for you. We want to thank our friends at Constellation, specifically Ideal, C-Systems, and Charter, for bringing this webinar to life for you today. Finally, I said finally, but we're going to do one more finally. If you've got questions throughout the webinar, there is a question and answer box that you can click on and submit your questions throughout. We are going to do our best to stay on topic, which is a big challenge for us. But in the midst of that, if you've got questions that pop up, I want you to go ahead and put them in the question and answer box, and we have some time at the end for us. Now, when you think of, if you've not been around us before, you may not know who Bob Clements International is. And what we do as an organization is we are the Gordon Ramsay of kitchen nightmares for dealerships. We are crazy about processes, implementing processes, and allowing you as owners and managers to reclaim your life, your sanity, and your dealership. And when we talk about opening up new locations, one of the things we've got to address is how do we do this in a way that allows us to continue that growth trajectory? Bob, look at this. Oh my gosh, we've got such great group of people on here today. So let's get started.
Awesome. I've got several on there that have multiple locations already.
Yeah.
They're rethinking. Like, what was I thinking?
Fantastic. All right, so let's move to the next slide, Bob.
Great. So as we were sitting here and thinking about the second location, like Sarah said, this is a question that we get asked a lot. And we've been asked probably more in 2020, 2021, not so much maybe in 2022, but because everything was going so good. And so as we get that question, we're sitting here saying there's some things you have to think about. First of all, I said, there's nothing wrong with opening the second location, but you have to do it in the right way and you have to do it for the right reasons. Yeah. I always like to use McDonald's as an example. You know, McDonald's started out as a small little place, and now they're like 87 billion locations across the world. And I say they did that because they had a very specific plan in place. They know how to make French fries over and over and over the same way, every location, how to make hamburgers. Their processes are tuned in so tight that they can literally take anybody who really doesn't know how to run a McDonald's franchise and just say, just do what we say to do, and you're going to make money in this McDonald's franchise. And that's the most important thing. I tell my dealers, it's not hard to open a second location if you've got incredible processes in place. I remember reading about the Ray Kroc story as he was doing the multiple locations for McDonald's, and he battled a lot with quality and things like this. And then he really put his foot down and said, this is how we're going to do it. And if you don't do it this way, then you're not going to have my franchise anymore. And so what he was, a nut on processes, a nut on cleanliness, following it, quality, every location had to be the same thing. So that's the thing you have to understand is there's nothing wrong with doing it, but if you're going to do it, you've got to look at it from a McDonald's standpoint and make sure you got all your processes in place. The challenge many times, Sarah, is people get so emotionally tied to saying, I need to get this location open.
You're exactly right. So before we go into this place of saying, okay, I'm ready to open up a new location. I'm excited to start collecting locations like Beanie Babies in the 90s. I need you to just stop for a minute. And we have to just collectively take a deep breath. No, this is not like a weird like yoga deep breath, but like pro yoga, but not the yoga deep breath. But what I need you to do is just stop for a minute, because here is the deal. We are not going to make a decision for your business based on emotion. And many times when we start talking about adding a new location and talking about like growth trajectory for dealerships, we get into this really emotional place because we're like, yes, this is my baby. Like, I've got to see it grow. I've got to see it develop. I've got to see it move forward. And I've got to keep everybody else out of my territory. Let me give you an example. Let's say that your manufacturer comes into the dealership and says, or your manufacturer rep comes in and says, all right, great news. You have fantastic market share opportunity. We love market share. Yes, I'm pro market share. But we need you to open up a new location so that we can hit this target. And if you don't do it, I'm going to put somebody in there that can. Oh, no, he didn't. Oh, no, he didn't. Yes, he did. Here's the deal. So most owners and managers in this situation go, no, we're not going to let that happen, because at the core, y'all are incredibly competitive human beings. And you go, I'm not going to let that happen. And so you start making decisions out of this really emotional place, where a decision like opening a new location needs to be an incredibly logical decision. So this, as we go through this, we're going to walk you through the steps you can do for logic. But the thing we need to make sure that we understand is that you can't out logic emotion. So if we are in this incredibly emotional place, we've got to find a way to take a step back and make sure that we are in a logical place, because this isn't a logical decision. Now, if you were in a place and you said, okay, great, I'm going to open up a new dealership location, it's only going to cost me a few milski, great, that's great, but it's easier to open a new location for a few milski than it is to pay for a new location. You know, one of the things I read a few years ago is that when you are in this place of an emotional decision specifically, you have the same fundamental brain capacity of decision making that a dog has, okay? A dog has. Now, I'm not hating on anybody, I'm not saying any bad jokes, but here's the deal. It's like, I have 2 dogs, and they're incredibly stupid human animals. Like, they're really not that smart. And I would never let those dogs make a decision for our business on that kind of scale. So we've got to move ourselves away from this place of saying, okay, we're making an emotional decision and we've got to move to a logical one.
It is. Then you have to sit there and understand that there are some things you're going to count on. As Jeff Blackton and myself talk to the dealers in our dealer success groups, and they're talking about this, we always say, okay, here's some things that I guarantee you can count on. So there's a lot of things that you can't count on if you're opening the new location, but here are 4 things that you can definitely count on after doing this 37 years. Count on it, bank on it. It's going to happen. Number 1 is you're going to have more stress in your life. Okay, so if right now you're going like, I have this incredible life and I have no stress in it, everything is going perfect, well, this is a great way to add stress to your life. So if you're looking for a stressor, if you're looking for something that's going to take you from here up to here from a stress standpoint, definitely open a second location, because that's going to do it. So you're going to have more stress. That's a part of it. You're going to have more employee issues. Now, this is odd because everybody has an easy time finding employees right now, and there's an abundance of good employees. So when we look at opening a second location, and we're sitting here going like, there's more employees that I can use, and they're all good employees, it'd make total sense to open a second location. But of course, that's not actually the reality of it. You're struggling to find good employees. You're struggling to find people that can show up. What makes you think it's going to be any easier to do that with a second location? You're going to have the same kind of problems from an employee standpoint: finding, hiring, keeping, compensating, dealing with employee issues. You're going to have that again in a second location. Less family time. Now, if you hate your family, open a second location.
Absolutely. Maybe a third.
You're going to have less time with your family, right? If right now you're going like, I'm spending every hour of my waking day thinking about this first location I have, this business I have here, right? I don't have time to do the things that I really want to do with my family. Then if you open a second location, you're going to have less family time. You're just going to do that. Now, again, it doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever, but I'm guaranteeing you in the beginning, for probably the first maybe 3 years, right, you're going to have more stress, you're going to have more employee issues, and you're going to have less family time. And the last one, and this is the one that concerns me, always say as we're talking to dealers, it can potentially be a huge drain on cash flow from your primary business. And that's the thing that concerns me the most. So as you're looking at a second location, count on more stress, more employee issues, less family time, and a drain on cash flow. So Sarah, let's say we don't want to open a second location. What are some options we might have?
Right. So before we sit here and go, all right, we're going to add a second, third, fourth, 10th location. I don't care what the number is for you. I want you to take a step back and consider all of the growth options for the locations that you currently have. All right. So the only growth option is not just opening new locations. Many times it's about building on or building out your first location. Now, when we see this, we say, okay, what does it look like to make sure we're either building on or building out in our first location? She goes, Sarah, we just don't have any space. Mm-hmm. My pushback to you is, have you cleaned out your service department recently? You say, Sarah, we don't have any space to bring in new units. We don't have enough base to take care of our technicians. When's the last time you cleaned out your service department? Because many times when we walk into a service department, it looks like it could be on a TV show called Hoarders Dealership Edition, okay? So the first thing is, what does it look like to take the space you already have and just simply clean it out? Maybe it's your parts department. You go, Sarah, we don't have any room for more parts. Are you actually keeping track of the parts that you have inside of your parts department through your business management system like Ideal, Constellation, or C System? Are you making sure that you know where inventory is and you have the right inventory and you're maximizing that space? Maybe you say, okay, Sarah, like really, our service department is clean. It looks like it is pristine. Like, come on in. It's going to be an incredible experience. Our parts department is organized. We're utilizing and maximizing our space. I really just don't have space. Well, before you go add a new location, ask, what does it look like if we were to simply add another building to our current location or continue to build that out? It's going to be a much less expensive option for you inside of your dealership, and it's going to give you some of that sanity back. So before we just start adding new locations, ask the question, what does it look like to build onto or build out the first location that you have?
Sure, and so you may say, gosh, I'm landlocked. I don't have the ability to do any one of those things. And maybe what you want to do is say, look, let's take our first location and move it someplace. Move it to where I've got more land. Move it where maybe I'm between these two places that I'm looking at. So maybe we still have one location, but we create a new location and really make it a destination. One of the things that I always try to get dealers to do is say, is your dealership a destination, or is it some place that I have to just come to because I want to come to, or that I want to come to your place? So think about that also. Maybe take a look at some land, right? And look at saying, okay, we're going to have one location, but the location I have, it's going to be a place that people will drive 30, 40 miles to. Instead of having, let's say you sell compact utility tractors. So instead of having 20 compact utility tractors on this lot and you open a second location, you have 20 over there. What would it look like if you had 40 in this one location? You now become a destination. You've got anything that anybody could want in one location. It solves employee issues. It solves stress issues. It solves cash flow issues. So think about that. Maybe your option here is not to open a second location, but to relocate your first location into a different position so you can suck the market out of both those other locations and really become that destination.
Yeah. The next thing I want you to think about as we move to the next slide is about rebuilding your website and being more aggressive with your online presence. I think one of the things that has happened over the last few years as we look at the dealership industries we work with is that we've understood that the internet, despite what many may say, is not going anywhere over the next few years. That's something that's going to be here to stay. But the transition that has to happen is we have to understand that our online presence, our website, what we're doing on Facebook Marketplace, all of these different places are an extension or another dealership location for us. Now, Carvana has really figured this out over the last few years. They have come to the point where they understand that people are willing to buy high-priced items without having to interact with another human being and have the process completely automated. Now, not get into the whole space of our robots taking over our world, probably. But as we look at it, Carvana has figured out that people are willing to buy high-priced items through the website. But here's the struggle. Many times, as you're working with website companies and you're starting to put the processes in place to become a online retailer in many situations, what happens is that what's happening online does not match what happens in your dealership. We call this congruency. And so as we're sitting here going, man, we want this online experience to be incredible. We want it to be frictionless, where it's easy for people to spend their money with us. We want it to be this place where people enjoy coming, getting the information they need and making the purchase. We go, that's fantastic. We're spending all this time, money, and energy into doing that. And then they have this like Taj Mahal experience, and they
Right.
walk into your dealership and it feels like that really shady bathroom gas station, the gas station with that like shady bathroom that you wouldn't actually want to stop at, and you go, where is the disconnect? Where is that? And that happens because of congruencies, and people go, I don't know what it is about it, but I just don't really like it. I'm just not really interested in making that part of this reality. And so we've got to be laser focused in on this to say, number one, do you have a website that answers the three big questions customers have when they walk in? They want to know, can I get financing? What do you have available? And how do I buy? Okay, that's what customers want to know when they get on your website. So do we have a website that's built to act as another location? And if so, does that website match the experience that the customers will have when they walk into the dealership? Now, I'm not saying make the dealership match the website. I'm saying the opposite is true. Maybe you spend some of that money that you were going to spend on a new location, making sure the dealership actually matches the website experience. Because I'm seeing more and more that inside of this continuum that the websites are becoming quickly better than the dealerships are.
Absolutely, and it is an issue that you have to do. People want that common experience. The other piece then is looking at maybe the people you have now. You say, gosh, no, I need to grow my business. I need to grow my business. Well, maybe the reason that you're not growing at your current location is you don't have the right people in the right place doing the right things. And many times this is management level people, so you say, gosh, I need this or I need that. And I said, I would really go back and make sure that your people are on target, that, you've got good people in all those positions. Because if you do open a second location, these are the people that are going to stay back at your first location, right? And if they're not good, strong people that can help continue to grow that, you're going to ultimately have more employee issues, which we talked about before. So again, really go back and evaluate your people. Are you getting the maximum productivity out of your parts people? Are you getting it out of your sales people? Are you getting it out of your service people? And if you're not, let's fix those things first, right? Let's make sure that our service department in our first location is really maximized, where we're maximizing our dollars out of that. Make sure the same thing's at the parts counter, right? Make sure those things are in place, because all those things you have in place there are going to be processes that you're going to be able to carry over to that second location. So I always tell my dealers, let's go back also before we think about a second location, saying, are we really maximizing everything that we could possibly maximize out of this first location? If you're just going to go there to increase sales, that's great, but I don't need a whole location. I can have a nice little parking lot with a sales guy there. I mean, I've got dealers that's done that before. But when you get ready to open a second location, you're going to have to staff a service department, a parts department, sales department, maybe rental if you do rental, right? And you're going to need those good processes in place. And you need to make sure you've got good managers in your first location that's got good, solid processes that you can carry on through to your new location if you choose to do that.
Yeah, and Bob, one of the things that we see when it comes to hiring better people is oftentimes it's because the good people are out there. The good people are out there, but a lot of times it's because you're not putting enough compensation out there in order to help move it forward. So that's been one of the biggest struggles we've run into.
It is. Yeah, you've got to pay for good people. That's a part of it. So let's go through our 7 questions.
All right. So on your piece of paper, I want you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is we are a dumpster fire and this is not true about us. 5 is Sarah, we got this and we've got it good. Like we are killing it in this area. So the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, can you walk away from your dealership for 6 weeks that season and have it operating as if you were still there? That's the first question you have to be able to answer honestly in order to say, I am ready to open another location. We walk through this with all of our dealers and our dealer success groups. When they come to us and they say, okay, we think you're ready, we're ready to open a new location. We say, okay, great. The number one thing I want to know is, can you walk away from your dealership for 6 weeks at season and have it operating if you were still there? Go ahead and put your number in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 5, Jim said he's a 7. We see you, Jim. But
I love that attitude.
I do too. Jim's like, I've got 73 locations, Sarah. Like, this is old news. Yes, I can walk away for 6 weeks at season. 4, 3. We've got some numbers in here that we need to be thinking about. So why is this important? Because if inside of your dealership, we have people walking in every single day and going, oh, I need to talk to Sarah and nobody else is going to work for me. It tells me 2 different things. Okay. The first is that you have not built the team around you. That's the first thing it tells me with glaring certainty. And number 2 is that as we look at this additional location, that we do not have the processes in place. Like, if you can't walk away for 6 weeks at your peak season, it means that you are the processes in your dealership. So if let's play this out. Let's say that we go, okay, great. We are so excited to open up a new location. This is going to be wonderful. We're pumped up, we're motivated, and I'm going to go ahead and move to this new location. We're going to move down that path, and then something comes up. Your first location is not going to have the processes that happen because you, in fact, are the processes. So in order for us to move from a place of 1 to a 7, like our man Jim up in here, what you have to do is you have to build your bench. You as an owner or a manager are going to be the person who has to move to the new location. Because in the midst of this transition, you are the one who are going to have to make new location decisions over and over and over again. So we've got to build our bench. Our entire philosophy is that we need to hire low and grow the people we need into the future. That's what we've got to do as we look at growing a dealership location out. Hire low and grow, and then get laser focused on your processes. I mean, this starts incredibly simple of saying, number one, in the service department, are our technicians using the software that we have in our service department to clock in and out of work orders? Are our parts people making sure that we are getting the right inventory in and that we're keeping track of inventory? Are our salespeople using the CRM in our Ideal to make sure that we are keeping track of customers and that we are reaching out to them when they need to be reached out to? I mean, this is not complex, but if we don't have the processes in place, just like McDonald's, you are never going to be able to grow this and to scale this. Customers can't come into your existing location and just ask to see you. We've got to build this bench. We have one dealership location up in Ohio that we've worked with for a number of years. And as we've worked with them, they've gone through this transition of saying, maybe it's not necessarily even we want to build a new location, but we've got to make some transitions inside of the dealership as a whole. And it's been a process for them as they've walked through to say, how do we start making it so that the owner of the dealership, his name is Bob, I mean, what a name, but like his name is Bob, can start transitioning that key person role to someone else other than himself. And so this doesn't happen overnight, but it comes down to processes and intentionality and maximizing the resources that you have at your disposal.
And I think Bob would be a good example. So not that they're looking at opening another location, but they meet all of our criteria in where they would be able to do that. Because Bob has really built his bench and built his team as a part of that.
That's it.
So let's talk about then cash flow. So let's rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being cash flow is no issue, 1 being, man, I'm struggling to cash flow my first location. Can you cash flow a second location without pulling cash from your first location? And again, this is what I see happen so many times as dealers open a second location. They're counting on their first location that's really profitable, doing well, things are going well, but they're counting on that as their ability to cash flow that second location. And you have to be so careful with that as you're doing this. Your second location is like a startup location again, right? I tell my dealers, you know, you need to get independent financing for it. If you're going to need money that you don't personally have yourself to invest in it, right, to get it up and to get it going, because it's going to take you 2 or 3 years at a minimum to get this second location up to where it's profitable and carrying its own weight in most cases. Now, there are some in cases that won't be that case, but are you working that? The number one thing that you're trying to do when you add a second location is, first of all, do no harm to your first location. Right? If there's any chance at all that you're going to do any financial damage to your first location, I would have to question, why would we want to risk everything that we've got over here to go do this? You may say, well, gosh, Bob, I've always dreamed of having a second location. Well, that's not logical. That's what Sarah said at the beginning. That's an emotional response. And again, we have to ask ourselves the question, logically, does it make sense? Can you get outside financing to help with this second location? Or many of you may be able to just finance it yourself and do it. If that's the case, that's great. But on a scale of 1 to 5, right? 5 is, I got the financing nailed on this. 1 is, yeah, we're going to have to pull cash flow out of our first location to do that, right? That's the question you have to ask. So Sarah, what about customers?
Yeah, the next thing we've got to ask is, will a new location take away any customers from your first location? Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 5, answer the question, will a second location take away any customers from your first or your current location that it's closest to? One of the things that we see is that when we do open a new location, whether it's your second, third, 57th, I don't care what number it is, we sit here and we open it with the understanding that we're like, okay, we're going to get all of these new customers. And again, use the example earlier of a field salesperson coming in and saying, look, we've got this market share opportunity. And we go, that's great. We want to get those new customers. We're excited for growth. We want to move in that direction. But when we actually look at the numbers and the data, we realize that there's a huge overlap, that if we would have just created a incredible destination that Bob was talking about earlier, it would have allowed us to continue that growth trajectory that we don't have the ability to do now. And so we've got to be really clear on the fact that if we are opening a new location, we can't let it take away customers from our first location. We were working with a dealership a number of years ago, and they were walking through this. And again, they had met every single one of these criteria of saying, yes, you should open a new location. Yes, they should. And their manufacturer was pushing and saying, hey, I want you to open this new location. If it's not you, it's going to be somebody else. And as they were looking at the different mix of products they had, they said, listen, the only manufacturer that this would benefit and would not pull new customers away is you. And it just doesn't make sense for us. And so we've got to be crystal clear that if we are going to open a new location, let's make sure it's not taking customers away from the current one. Just as customer erosion will have an impact, so will a different group of customers as we look at the primary location. So one of the things that I see over and over again as we walk through this with dealers day in and day out is they say, okay, Sarah, my dealership is in the country. My dealership is in a rural area, or it's in this place that is off the beaten path a little bit. And I want to open a new location, more of a metropolitan area, a city center, whatever that may be. Great. There's no customer overlap. Right. Love that. Okay. Love that. That's great. Check. But here's the thing you've got to be crystal clear and watching out for in this minute is that the customers that you are taking care of in a rural area is not going to be the same customer that you are working with in a metropolitan area or a city center area. We've got two very different types of customers that need to be dealt with and worked with in very different ways. Think about it. Even from the way we communicate with the customers has to be different. Our marketing has to be different. The way that we create processes and services for this customer is a fundamentally different customer. And so when we decide to open up a new location, the customer component of this is a critical piece of the puzzle. This is why we see a lot of our dealers make the decision that when they do open up a new location, that they do more of a hub and spokes model with the dealership, where the main location is the one that does the marketing for all. We've got a really fantastic service center. We've got all the parts we need available. And then we've got these spokes of the wheel all the way around the dealership that are feeding the work and feeding the parts back and forth to that. We have typically one technician at these spoke model of this, the hub and spokes piece of it. And then we've got the ability to move stuff back and forth all day long. They do this for a number of reasons, but one is because they understand that at each one of these locations, we're going to have a little bit of a different customer. The other way I've seen this happen is that when we're working with dealerships who say typically work with a commercial customer, and then they decide that they want to start working with more residential customers, the way that you do everything has to change inside of your dealership depending on who your customers are. If you're working with more commercial customers, your processes and parts and service are there to say, how do we maximize the amount, how quickly we can get a unit back out to this customer? When that unit is down, it is costing them money. And so our service processes have to be so laser focused on making sure that we are moving stuff back and forth as quickly as possible. Whereas if we're dealing with a residential customer, sure, they want their unit back, or if you're in the power sports world, sure, they want their unit back, but it's as long as it's back by the time they need it again on Friday to go destroy it and bring it back to your service department on Sunday night so that it's ready for the next week. So when we think about this customer piece, this is a really big conversation. This is a really big piece of the puzzle when we talk about adding in a location. And the question you've got to ask yourself is, number one, will this new location take any customers away? But number two, if I do proceed forward with this, do I actually know who my customers are? I would encourage you as you walk down this path to reach out to your manufacturers, because many of them have the data on who your customers are in each of the areas specifically.
Is the other piece then, as you're looking at adding another location, is the lines that you carry. And like Sarah said, in most cases, many of you, your manufacturer, your primary manufacturer, your primary vendor will be the one that reaches out and says, hey, Bob, we have this opening, this vacuum in this market down here, and we're going to give it to somebody, right? Which is that emotional piece again. And we would really like for you to have it because you're our favorite. And so,
Has anybody said that about you ever?
No, I've never been called a favorite from anybody. So you're looking at this and saying, okay, well, I've got my primary covered, okay, but there's a lot of secondary lines that you carry that are also adding to the service work, the parts sales, right? Even the whole good sales is a part of it. And will those be able to move over? Let's say it's a handheld line. And let's say that, as an example, that you're handling this one particular handheld line over here, right? But I can't get it over here. Well, it may not mean that you shouldn't open that second location, but you have to think about, okay, I've got to have a handheld line as a part of what I'm doing there. So, what am I going to put in that place? And the challenge is when I add another line that I don't have at my primary location, I add more parts, I add more sales service training, I add more sales training. So you have all these additional costs that are associated with handling lines that are different, right, in this second location than you do, again, in your first location. And it won't be your primary, I promise you that. You're going to be able to take your primary, you probably wouldn't even look at doing it, but it's the secondary line, the complementary lines, that maybe your primary line generates, let's say 40% of your total revenue in service parts and sales. You still got 60% that are coming from the secondary lines that you're handling. So I think you really have to look at that and just understand, again, anytime you add another line, and you've probably heard Sarah and I talk about it before, it needs to be complementary, but we're trying to complement what we already have at our first location and then bringing over to our second location to do that. So then Sarah goes about, who are we going to have manage this?
Well, and that's the next question is, okay, great. On a scale of 1 to 5, where are you at with the last question of making sure that we can bring on that new major line specifically to that? Because to your point, Bob, as you add additional lines, it takes up your time, your attention, and your money, and that's the last thing we want. All right, so answer this question for me in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 5, do you have someone trained to manage your first or current locations? Now, with this, I want 1 to be, oh my gosh, Sarah, I do everything and there's nobody else who even knows what to do. It feels like I hired all these people and nobody knows what's going on. Mm-hmm. That's really weird if they're sitting right next to you. But number 5 is, man, Sarah, I've got a fine-tuned team. I have a manager in place and we have this down to a science. All right, I'm thinking like, where are you at in the assistance to the regional manager position with our friend Dwight from The Office? So what does this look like inside of your dealership? Before we move to adding another location, there's some things that I need this new GM to do. Now, before we get into this, I want to take a quick step back and say, as we think about this new location, why is it that you as the owner can't be at the first location? The thing is, when you open a new location, there are a lot of decisions that have to be made specifically on a second location and a third location. So the second and third location specifically, that you as the owner have to make because they are expensive decisions and you're trying to figure out the processes for these additional locations, all right? No one is going to spend your money at the new locations the same way you're going to spend your money. But once you get to 4, 5, 6, 7, and 477, you've got the process fixed and figured out, and we know where we're going with it. We're spending the same money. We know what the expenses are going to be, and you don't have to be quite as involved in that. So what is it that we need someone we're training to be a GM to do inside of these new locations? Number 1, this person should be running weekly meetings with other managers, okay? Now, when we work with multi-location dealerships, this is a pivotal part of every conversation. Bob, you work with a handful of dealerships that have 5 to 12 locations all around the world. And as you're doing that, one of the things that you do sometimes on a weekly basis with them is you bring all of the managers together and you say, let's talk about what's going on inside of your department. And so what we want is we want somebody inside of the dealership at the current location to be able to have those conversations on a weekly basis. You as an owner should be part of the conversation. You should be that like fly on the wall who's just listening for information. But we want this GM to be one who's actually spearheading these conversations. We need to know about the numbers. We need to know about what issues have come up, any issues where we're making each other's lives harder,
Right.
department by department. We need to bring all of these things up. And I need a GM who's able and willing to have those conversations. It's critically important in the midst of this. Number two, we need this GM to go over the financial numbers of the existing dealership with the owner each month. Now, this is typically separate from that first conversation. This is a conversation where you and the GM sit down and say, okay, let's talk about finances, where we're at, where we need to be, what does it take to crack the nut every single month and keep these at, where are we at in regards to our projections and how we do it. And again, in our Dealer Success Group program, you walk alongside dealers all the time in making these happen. And then finally, we've got to make sure that they fully grasp the vision, direction, and the people they need to grow the first location. Now, oftentimes, this is the biggest challenge because you as an owner don't exactly know the vision, the direction, and the people you need to grow the location. As an owner of a dealership, I always say that there are three main things that need your attention every single day, and it's to answer the questions, where are we trying to go? How are we going to get there? And do I have the people I need to take me there? I always use the example, if we were getting ready to go get on an airplane, we walked up and we saw this pilot. He's standing there, he's like, he goes, it's my first commercial flight today. And I know we're going to Florida. I'm not really sure where in Florida, but we're going to Florida. We're real excited about this. And unfortunately, we don't have enough flight attendants to really make sure everybody gets all the drinks they need, but like, we'll be fine. Would you get on that flight? No, most people will be like, no. Some of you are like, I have a sense of adventure, Sarah. I love to get on that flight. Okay, we're very different people. And so I would say no, but here's what happens. As you're trying to grow your dealership, as we're trying to add new locations, you're like, I don't really know where we're going. We're just going to try to add some more. I don't really have a plan on how to get there. It's just going to be kind of like we're going to hope it works. Hope's not a strategy for running a dealership, my friend. And then finally, I don't know if I have the people I need to take me there. Like, if we can't answer those questions as an owner, heaven knows your new GM can't answer those questions either. You know, one of the things though that is incredibly important, especially as you're looking at adding a new location, is making sure you have the right software to take you to that new location. And one of the reasons that I am a huge advocate of the Constellation system, is specifically ideal when we are looking at adding new locations, is they have incredible dashboards so that you as an owner and manager can look at exactly the same numbers at the same time. It's live, it's interactive, and you can get a pulse on where your business is at any given point during the day, week, or month. And so that kind of visibility is a powerful, powerful tool when it comes to opening a new location.
It is. You know, Jeff and I laugh all the time. You know, a dealership is all about math and numbers. And that's the nice thing, that when you're using your business management software, it can feed all that information to you. So again, it's a critical part of it. And again, I'm guessing most of you that are on here already have a platform or a system you're using, but really harnessing that system. The other thing then, Sarah, we have to look at is, do we have a clear understanding of the staffing needs for the new location? So I'm working with a dealership right now that's getting ready to take on a new location, and it's an existing dealership, and the owner came to him and they wanted to sell it, but the owner wanted to continue to work there. Right. And so, and I'm, as I'm working with this dealer, I'm going, gosh, what could go wrong with that? Right. So this guy basically had not succeeded enough to really make his dealership worth a lot. He doesn't want a lot for it. Right. Which is okay. That's a part of it. But again, so as I'm talking to the owner of the group I'm working with in our dealer success groups now, he goes, I think this makes a lot of sense. I just let this guy keep managing his store. And I go, he didn't manage it before. That's why he wants to sell it to you. This is a bad idea, not a good idea. Mm-hmm. I said, so what do we need there for staffing? He goes, well, he's already got all of his staff in place. And I go, how profitable is a shop? Well, it's not making very much money. And he doesn't have the right staffing in place. How are we doing in parts? I don't know. Not doing as well as we could there. Then he doesn't have the right staffing in place. And so as I talked to this dealer, I said, you have to restaff this store. And all you're going to do is irritate a lot of people in this small community, because you're going to be firing aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters. I need you to think about that before you make this decision to do it. What's your staffing needs? If it's a brand new location, right, we got to staff a service department. You may go, okay, well, I'm going to have a service manager. That'd be the last person I'd hire in a brand new service department. I need an A-level tech and a really good service writer, right? I can't afford a service manager at that point. So where are we going to get those people? Where am I going to find a really good A-level tech? Well, they're not hard to find. They're just expensive. So I just tell people again, I can find you A-level techs all day long. The question is, can you afford them? Mm-hmm. So they're there, but that's something you're going to have to look at. So you're going to have some real costs associated with that. Same thing at the parts counter, whether you're selling $500,000 worth of parts or $100 worth of parts, you're still going to have a person at the parts counter, right? And this person that I hire is somebody that I'm hoping I can grow on into a parts manager as I get the parts sales up. So who would that be? And do I have a need for one or two? Where are those needs at? And you have to look at those. And again, it all goes back to salary caps and things like that we've talked about in other meetings, right? But you've got to really look at your staffing. Who's going to be the salesperson? You say, well, gosh, Sarah told me that if I'm going to open this second location, I need to be over there. Well, I'm going to be the salesperson. I say, well, that's great short term, right? But long term, now you got two businesses you're trying to keep your eyes on. So who are we going to bring in as a salesperson? Do they need to do outside sales and inside sales, just inside sales, just outside sales? What's that structure you need there? What kind of staffing? Because it takes a very different salesperson that can go out and do what I call hunting compared to a salesperson that simply stays in the dealership and does what I call farming. So again, so you have to look at from a staffing standpoint, Sarah, do we have the right people in place? If you're taking over an existing dealership, I'm guaranteeing you some of the people may be the right people, but there's going to be a lot of change and transition that you're going to have there. So then it also comes back to, can you delegate?
Well, and I think that's it. So when we're looking at the staffing portion of this, and again, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. Do you actually know what the staffing needs are for a new location? The question that it really comes down to when we talk about staffing specifically is, what can you take off your plate and move to someone else's plate? When you hired your first employee as an owner or as a GM, the reason you hired them is because we wanted to be able to take something off of our plate and move it onto someone else's plate. The same thing holds true when we start looking at adding new locations. The beautiful thing about adding a new location is there are times where we can use one person to take care of roles at multiple locations. So one of the things I've seen a number of dealerships do is when we've got warranty items coming up, we have one person who's responsible for warranty at all the dealerships locations. There's a group up in the Seattle area that has this figured out to a T. They do a fantastic job of using one person to manage warranty for all of the people. The other thing is marketing. We can have one marketing person if we get to the point where we can afford our own marketing person inside of our dealership locations that can take care of marketing for all of our locations, which is an incredible thing. But then there are things that happen that you as an owner have to delegate off of your plate that you go, but Sarah, I just love doing it. I don't want to give it to anybody else. Well, my friends, that's where delegation comes in. And there's this process that we go through when it comes to delegation. We have to teach the why. We've got to train the skill, and we've got to equip with resources and authority to do it. You go, but it's just easier if I do it myself, Sarah. If I just do this myself, it's going to go so much easier. Listen, my friends, you are not going to be able to continue just to do it yourself if this is the growth trajectory you're on. You've got to have people around you where you teach them the values, train the skills, and equip them with the resources and the authority to make the decision and make it happen. You know, one of my favorite examples of this is I was at a national dealer meeting a few years ago, and as I was sitting there, we were talking about this, and I said to them, I said, when we delegate, one of the most important things about delegation is that if somebody does it 80% as good as you, it has to be good enough. Now, I always have the people who go, Sarah, if they do payroll 80% as good as me, that's not good enough. Okay, Karen, we see you. Okay, I'm sorry if your name's Karen. But okay, we see you. We see you. Yeah, I know there are these moments where if you don't count the cash flow the right way or you don't submit taxes the right way, it's not good enough, 80%. Okay, I get it. But for 99.9% of the things that happen inside of your dealership, if it's done 80% as well as you would do it, it has to be good enough. And that's a hard thing. And so I was having this conversation in a group in a national dealer meeting with and a dealer came up to me. He goes, Sarah, does that mean that the people who are painting my dealership right now inside my dealership, I shouldn't be watching them on my Blink camera and sending them text messages about how they're doing it wrong?
You missed this spot.
And I feel like my face probably said it before my mouth did, because typically that's what happens. You see it on my face before it comes out my mouth. And I said, that's exactly what I'm saying. There are these things that as an owner or a manager, you'll get so micro involved with. And if you want to be on this trajectory for growth and opening a new location, you've got to make sure that you have identified these blind spots in yourself where you say, okay, I'm managing this over here, but it doesn't really need me in it. As an owner, the one thing I would say over and over again that you have to touch every single time it happens is writing checks, okay? Signing checks, making sure the money that's going out of your business is legit. If we see one place that theft happens more often than not inside of a dealership, it's because you have delegated the responsibility of signing checks over to somebody other than yourself. So we can delegate everything else, but when it comes to signing checks, that's on you, my friend. So Bob, the final piece of this, and again, if you've got questions, go ahead and make sure that those are coming through the Q&A, but the final piece is about floor plan, Bob.
It is, and so it goes back to what I talked about in the very beginning was cash flow, and to make everything work, most of your manufacturers are going to have some floor planning that's available for you. Then you got to go back and say, okay, do I have sufficient floor plan? Right, because if your main supplier is going to still be your main vendor over here, do I have enough floor plan to make all these come together, and the ability to get my line of credit extended? So most of you have a line of credit that you work off of under the slower times. If you don't, that's great for you, right? But if you do, you got to go with the bank and say, okay, if I'm going to open this second location and I have a $100,000 line of credit over here, can I get a $100,000 line of credit over here? So you have to look from a financial perspective and say, do I have those things in place? Get with your floor plan companies. And these are conversations you should be having anyway. I think many times the dealerships that I work with have very little communication with the floor plan companies. And I'm just telling you, and we know several of the people in the floor plan companies, they love it when you have conversations with them. They love to talk to you about it, right? They got a lot of money sitting on the line, making sure that you're doing it correctly. And I think, again, when you're working with floor plan companies, don't hesitate to reach out, have conversations with them, let them know what you're thinking. Before I ever opened up a second location, I would definitely, again, get with my floor plan company and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, right? And they may say, well, that's great, and I know that you were really profitable last year, but you spent a lot of that money on upgrading your facility, which doesn't add any value from a floor plan standpoint, right? And so those are the conversations you can have with your floor plan company, again, and say, this is what I'm thinking. Give me your thoughts and your insights, because, again, I see Ron put down there, the floor plan guys are not the enemy. Exactly. Ron, the floor plan guys are not the enemy, right? They are the people that you need. No different than your banker, that you've got a banker out there that's a part of this process. So I really would encourage you, again, to get with your financial people, communicate with them what you're doing, lay out a plan so that they know, so they're not surprised by anything. I go back again, I know a lot of people don't like their floor plan company because they hate floor checks. Okay, but I just would tell you again, and like I say, we work with a couple of the big ones. Sarah's got great relationships with the people in those, and they're really great people to work with. And the more that they're aware of what you're doing, the more they can help you and guide you in the right direction to do it. So, Sarah?
I would say the other thing, and again, as I've had conversations with the people I know who work in these floor plan companies and your inventory finance companies, is make sure that when you do start these conversations, ask them what you can do to bring additional value to the dealership. We had one dealership we work with that was looking at adding additional location, and they could not get the floor plan for it. They had a really profitable year, but at the end of the year prior, they needed to burn off money because they didn't want to pay taxes. Okay, we see you. But then they went to floor plan, and they had a really beautiful profit before the end of the year, and they had decided to use the money to pave their parking lot. Okay, so they spent a good chunk of change, and then they couldn't get the floor plan for it. And I had called our friend who had worked in the inventory finance and said, what do they need to do? He said, if they would have taken half of the money and bought land with it, then it would have allowed us to be able to, because it had brought some additional value to the picture.
You increased your asset. Paving the parking lot did not fundamentally increase the asset that they had that they needed from the floor plan company standpoint. So again, it's about doing things in a smart way from that perspective. And I would also, and again, I really appreciate the folks at Constellation sponsoring our webinar today. But again, also, I would reach out to my software company, so I'd reach out to iDeal or C-Systems or Charter if you happen to be using their platforms, and saying, hey, look, we're getting ready to add another location, or maybe we're getting ready to add a third location, because the more that they're aware of it, the more they can help you, again, as what they're doing as a part of that too. So it's really about communicating all across the board with what we're doing there.
So I want, as we finish up here, we have a few questions that have popped through. If you have other questions, feel free to throw those in there. But I want you to answer in the chat for me. Based on the information we talked about today, where are you in being ready to open a new location? Are you at a 1 or are you at a 5? Now, regardless of where you are in the midst of this, one of the things I would encourage you to do is say, what do our processes look like? And what do we need to do to move us in a place of making sure we've got the right processes in place? Now, we are going to do a flash sale for you. You guys will all get this in your emails shortly hereafter, but we have our dealer toolbox for $300 off for the next 48 hours. But the reason that we're giving that to you as our flash sale this time is because we have a program in there called 5 Weeks to a Profitable Dealership. And in 5 Weeks to a Profitable Dealership, Bob walks you through in videos, a 5-minute task every single day for 5 weeks that will allow you to make sure that your dealership processes are fine-tuned and tuned in so that when you are ready to open up a new location, you are ready to do that.
Yeah, one of the things that I always start off with in the 5 Weeks to Successful Dealership, and this would be kind of an interesting for you guys to think about, but I tell all of my dealers, right? If you can't answer this fundamental question, we have an issue, and it's what's your break-even point?
Yeah.
I tell people again, in business, everything is about cash flow, and one of the things you have to be able to answer from my perspective is so if we open a second location, what do we have to do in service parts and sales just to break even? What's your break-even point?
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting for you guys to go back and look at what your break-even point is in your dealership. What's the break-even point for the month, the week, or the day? Once you turn the key in the door and you flip the lights on, at that moment in time, how many dollars in service, parts, or sales gross profit do you need to generate just to pay for the cost of operating that dealership? And I will tell you that most dealerships, when I ask them what their break-even point is, they go, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And that's one of those fundamental questions. You're definitely going to need it to know it for your second location. How much do we have to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to break even, not make any money, just to break even and to make this thing happen? So that 5 Weeks to a Profitable Dealership, it's a great series. It's in the toolbox. I think you will all enjoy it.
Yeah. So, Bob, it looks like we had a few questions pop in. The first question said, you mentioned salary caps.
Yes.
Could you talk about that just a little bit more? I'm not familiar with the concept.
Okay, so salary caps, each department has a percent of its gross profit it can use for salaries, okay? In the sales department, 45% of your not your gross profit, 45% of your labor sales in the service department can be used to offset your salary costs. Okay, so if you wanted to know, am I in my salary cap, since we're done with 2022 now, go back and take your 2022 labor dollars sold, include warranty as a part of that, internals, all that together, right? Multiply that by 45%, and that's going to give you a number. Then look at what your payroll was for the service department for 2022 and see if you were over or under that salary cap. If you're over the salary cap, then you got some issues if you go to another location, because again, you're going to be over in that same thing there. In the parts department, it's all based upon gross profit. And again, for most of our dealers in the parts department, 28% of your gross profit, not of your gross labor or gross sales, but gross profit. Keep in mind, we pay bills with profit, not with sales. So 28% of your gross profit in the parts department is available for you to use as an owner to offset your salaries for your parts department. And for most of our dealers, 22% of your gross profit you can use to offset the cost of operating your sales department. So I was telling my dealers, again, you got to have your arms around those numbers. Because again, when you go into a new location, second location, you're going to be way over on your salary caps. Whether you have any service work or not, you're going to need a service tech. Right? If you have any parts sales or not, you're going to need a parts person. So in the beginning, you're going to be way over, but this is where you can really suck up money fast as part of it. So you should know your salary caps. If you got any questions at all, reach out to Sarah and I. We can help you with that.
Absolutely. Another one came through. Can we justify new hires to delegate and help carry GM load at our first location to open the second? If we can't justify them, we shouldn't be opening a new location. Like, we have to be able to justify them. And again, it goes back to understanding salary caps and our profitability. Now, when we look at adding a new location, and understand the profitability, what do you typically see, Bob, with where it becomes an actual profitable dealership and we're able to cover all the costs from the second location?
Kind of like any other business, you're looking at probably 3 years. Again, the perk of it is you've got lines that you're already familiar with, right? You're probably lines that your new customers are going to be familiar with, so you don't have to teach them anything about new lines. So, but I'd say probably 3 years where you're going to start getting profit. Key is how much profit. Well, we expect you to have a net profit of 10%. So again,
Minimum.
a minimum of 10%. So that's the other thing you should look at. If my net profit is only at 1 or 2%, then I'm going, we got a lot of opportunity in our first location. We're not even taking advantage of here. You're walking over $1,000 bills, right? And so really should we be looking at the second location? So my goal is I want every dealer that we work with to have a minimum of a 10% net at the end of the year. That tells me you're really maximizing your first location. So I would say on the average, probably 3 years. And a general manager is an expensive hire. This is not going to be a $40,000 a year person. You're probably, for most of the dealerships, this is going to be a $60,000, $70,000 a year person. And you're going to do some bonuses. We help with all of our bonuses, but typically in some instances, you're going to spend about 1% of your total gross profit just to offset the cost of a general manager. But it's critical, like you said, Sarah, you as the owner are going to have to go to that second location.
Absolutely.
Now, if you have multiple locations already, you've already got this problem solved. I always tell dealers again, the second location is as hard to make go as your first one. The third one's easier because now you got your process down. Fourth one, fifth one. I got one dealership group up in Virginia. They've got 13 stores now. I started with them when they had 2, and now they can pop them in just like this because they are like a McDonald's. Yeah. Right, they've got them. They got all the people in place to do it. Your second location will always be the most difficult location outside of your first one. It'll be the most difficult location for you to get going.
Yeah. All right. The last question that we're going to have time for here is, Bob, we are looking at buying a pre-existing location. How do we make sure that in the midst of that, we are able to bring the new people in and have them be part of the team?
Well, again, this goes back, Sarah, to what you talked about, having vision and direction. And I would say, again, most of our owners, when I talk about what's your vision, they go, I wear glasses, Bob. My vision is not that good. And that's not what we're talking about here. We really need to say, where are you trying to go with this business? There's a difference between vision and mission. Vision is this thing that everybody catches this picture of. I always think about, I grew up in the 60s, and I remember when we went to—
Which explains a lot.
It does explain a lot. When we went to the moon, and John Kennedy at that point cast a vision for our country. Before the end of the decade, we are going to send a man to the moon and bring him back safely. That was this massive vision, and our whole country got behind it. It made sense to do this. This was something that we were all on board achieving. And literally, even though he was assassinated a few years after he made that and cast that vision, in July of 1969, before the end of the decade, we did put 2 men on the moon and bring him back. That's the power of vision. And I tell people again, you need to make sure you've got a really good vision in your first location. It's cast, and then as you go into your second location, and let's say you're trying to keep the people that are there. I'm not saying all the people in the second location, if it's existing, are bad people, but I would say again, but cast your vision. Let them know that you've got something that's bigger than them that we're trying to achieve here. So I think a vision is an important part of it.
Yeah. So as you guys walk through this process of deciding whether another location is the right decision for you, I want to make sure that you have our information. Our team just put it in the chat for you. But if you reach out, if you need to talk to me, Sarah at bobclements.com, Bob at bobclements.com. We are from Missouri. We've got to keep it incredibly simple around here, folks. But we'd love to visit with you and continue the conversation of what this looks like for you and for your dealership. Again, we want to take a moment and thank our sponsors, our friends at Constellation Systems with Ideal, C-System, and Charter. They do an incredible job of continuing to move the bar for the industry and provide incredible solutions that you can understand what's truly going on inside of your dealership all of the time. So, Bob, on that note,
thank you. Thank the folks at Constellation for putting this on. And again, like Sarah said, reach out if you have any questions at all. We'd love to help you through those.
Have a great day, guys.